Hello, 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 hello.
Hello.
And you're listening to the sedative hour. I'm sorry. And we're back again for another Dream Idiots.
Yes, indeedly doodly.
How are you?
I am well. It's a beautiful spring day here in Colorado.
And it's hot as hell here.
The birds are shining, the sun is singing. It's perfect outside.
Alrighty.
We're back. Thanks so much for all your reactions, your responses, your reviews. We appreciate it. We're coming up on episodes 19 and 20 soon, and it's kind of hard to believe that we're chugging along like this, but it feels pretty good.
Yeah, making some good progress. And thanks for the feedback and liking and subscribing and doing all the bullshit that you're doing for us.
Progress or something like it. And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Excellent. I'm wearing the dunce cap first, I think.
Passing a virtual dunce cap back and forth. The greasy, sweat-stained dunce cap. What you got for us, Brian?
Well, here we go. If I'm clever enough to bring up my notes in a timely fashion, I have a fun-filled little tale for you this week. It's a story I'm calling "Puppies and Napalm."
Okay.
Two great things that just go great together. So on the morning of May 19th, 1970, a gentleman I'm sure you're aware of, Mr. Neil Young, sat down and had breakfast and was flipping through a copy of Life magazine and saw photos from the shooting at Kent State. And 15 or 20 minutes later, he had written the song Ohio about that event. But before we talk about that, we're gonna back up a little bit. We're gonna go back a few weeks prior to Kent State. On April 22nd, just a month prior, word spread on the Kent State campus that students there who were protesting, and this was at the height of all the Vietnam War protests against Nixon and all the insanity going on in Vietnam, students announced that they were going to kill a dog with napalm. A huge crowd showed up at this expected time, obviously outraged and convinced this was actually going to happen, and they were determined to stop it and probably lynch anyone that was involved in any sort of act like that. There was even animal welfare was on hand with a leash and the equipment there to save this dog, but it was basically a stunt to elicit outrage at the fact that napalm was being used against human beings in Vietnam. So this event was planned by a 21-year-old kid. I say kid, recent graduate, actually of Kent State. He was 21 years old, a guy named Bill Arthrell. He was there wearing a suit and tie, looking good in a coat, but there was no dog, and there wasn't going to be any nasty display where a dog was tortured.
He used kittens instead.
Right. Because kittens, who gives a shit about cats, really? But the point he was trying to make was, really crystal clear. If it's illegal to use, if it's illegal, improper, unethical, whatever you want to call it, to do this to an innocent dog, why should our government be using this against civilians in Vietnam? A really, really good question. One that was never, as far as I can recall, ever adequately answered by really anyone. Vietnam War was raging. Young people across America, by 1970, by a few years prior to that, protests had begun. There were frequent clashes with police, and Bill, to a certain extent, was already on the radar screen for local with law enforcement, and it's clear that they were not amused with this little tactic. And, he was, not fair to say he was being watched, but he was definitely known by law enforcement in the area. So that's April 22nd. This poor dog is not napalmed. Bill is back on campus, though, on May 4th. And he's on campus. He's joined by a friend of his, a guy named Robert Stamps. And there are a total of 1,500 other people on campus that day to protest the war. And Nixon and Kissinger, it's a peaceful protest. It is not violent. It's just young people exercising their right to gather, their right to use free speech, and the fact that napalm was being used, and that it was clear that thousands of innocent people were being killed in a horseshit war. They were there, to protest that. Tons has been written about this story, and much of the story is pretty well known. Police was there. National Guard members were there. I'm not sure of the quantity of them. Yeah, certainly in the dozens. I don't think in the hundreds. And after a certain period of time, depending on whose account you want to read and who you want to believe, shots are fired. 4 people are killed, 9 people are injured. The 4 people that die, Jeffrey Miller was shot in the mouth, was killed instantly. One woman named Allison Krause was shot in the chest, taken to the hospital dead on arrival. A guy named William Knox Schroeder was shot in the chest, died about an hour later. And then Sandra Scheuer was shot in the neck, died a few minutes later. All 4 of these people who died who were the biggest victims that day, died. They were shot at distance. All of them were shot from between 265 and nearly 400 feet away. And these assholes that decided to open fire, their justification after the fact was that their lives were at risk, right? Which of course is nonsense, because if you manage to shoot someone from a football field away, they're not really posing much of a threat to you at the time. Arthrell's friend, this guy Stamp, was also one of those that was shot that day. He was basically shot in the ass, but he survived. The closest victim to the shooters, to the National Guard members, was 71 feet away when he was shot. So their claims of self-defense are complete nonsense. Arthrell, after the fact, was charged criminally related to the events on May 4th, but disputes again whether or not it was tied to the May 4th activities or his other exhibit with the dog a couple of weeks prior to that. But charges were later dropped due to lack of evidence. It was law enforcement basically just fucking with him, I guess. But he didn't really face any charges, and certainly never went to jail for any of his activities. But this period of time for Arthrell and for thousands of other people in that generation really served to galvanize people, made people social justice activists, for lack of a better term, many of whom use that as a benchmark or a watershed moment in their lives, and it served to point them, many of them, in a new direction where these types of issues are always sort of front of mind. And they, many of these folks would wind up being involved in protests and social engagement for most of the rest of their life. Arthrell was later quoted as saying that he never saw a protest he didn't like. He did later on get his master's degree, also at Kent State, taught history in Ohio for years and years. He was definitely a bit of a nomad. He traveled quite a bit. He was arrested dozens and dozens of times. He couldn't even tell you how many times he'd been arrested. He lost track. And then as he got a little bit older, he started to travel more. Would take, at least once a year, or take over the summer, would take long jaunts to other parts of the world. Lived in Great Britain, lived in Thailand, spent time in Germany and Israel, at one point in New York City for a short time. About 10 years ago, he got focused on Ukraine. At the time, there was something called the Maidan Revolution or Maidan Uprising. I didn't get into the details of that event or what the genesis of that was. Probably not unlike the stuff that's going on there now, only less so. During this uprising, 130 Ukrainian, citizens, civilians, protesters, were killed, and Arthrell went into an extended period of depression just because he had empathy for these folks that died, and then subsequent to that, made several trips apparently to Ukraine, spending weeks, sometimes months there, doing outreach work and working in various communities to do what he could. He worked on a documentary called Ukraine: Path to Freedom, and then also wrote a book of poetry called Ukrainian Heart. So this guy was just by all accounts, a stupendous human being. I'd never heard of the guy until just probably 3 months ago. First week of February of this year, he was in Oklahoma and was heading back to Ohio, back home. In the middle of the night, he was killed in a car accident in between. And apparently said of himself shortly before he died that he was most proud of his sobriety. When he was a younger man, he had apparently had a problem with alcohol, and said also of himself that he was proud of his sense of loyalty and willingness to try new things, and, quote, being courageous, being outrageous, being a leader in the peace movement, taking dangerous adventures and doing it alone, almost like being Indiana Jones, being a leader in the peace movement. So this is a stupid, just an incredibly amazing human being who he died at 72, which, is in many respects seems young to me, but in this day and age, especially with the political climate and Ukraine, guys like Bill Arthrell are few and far between, and I feel confident that he'll be widely missed.
Wow, that's a tremendous one, Brian. I'd never heard of this guy.
I hadn't either. Actually, a mutual friend of ours posted something about him when he passed away, and that's when I started researching him a little bit. And it's like, wow, it's really really interesting that one seminal moment on one day just set him in a certain course of in a certain direction with his life that just it set the tone for the following 50 years basically. So it's sort of incredible. And I judge he must have gotten the story of the idea for napalming a dog from someone else, because there were two other protesters who on November 8th of 68, so a couple of years prior, 18 months prior, these guys, Joseph Snyder and Hester Butterfield, announced that they were at the University of Cincinnati. They had a 3-month-old puppy dog. I'm trying to find what the dog's name. Oh, the dog was named Steppenwolf, which I thought was hilarious. Again, also protesting Vietnam. They are part of it was called the Cincinnati Draft Project's ad hoc committee to bring war atrocities home. And they passed out a flyer for their event on Veterans Day. You're invited to attend a ritual dog napalming. Bring family and friends to watch the sacrificial burning of a 3-month-old puppy with new improved sticky napalm. Veterans Day, 12:30, University of Cincinnati Bridge, sponsored by the ad hoc committee to bring war atrocities home. Of course, again, it was just a ploy to get people pissed off, and it definitely worked.
A couple of things in regards to the napalming the puppy. Mm-hmm. Where was this in relation to the infamous picture of the girl with the napalm, the girl running down the road in Vietnam with her clothes burned off? Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do know. That was right before when that event happened.
Okay, so was that in the public consciousness? Do you think that image?
Maybe a little bit. So that was, I believe, 4 years early. That girl's name was Phan Thi Kim Tuk. She was 13 or 14 and had been, they'd been firebombed, and she had ripped off all of her clothes because there was all fucking on fire. Yeah.
That was from 1966, roughly. That
somewhere
image?
In there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. My God.
Yeah.
It also helps to explain the, I don't know when this came out, but at one point National Lampoon had their very famous cover that caused a lot of problems with the picture of the dog on the front, and it has a gun to its head, and it says, buy this magazine or we'll shoot this dog. on the cover.
No,
Um, so